We're about to do our check and then get started. All right, we seem to be good on Facebook. All right, looks like we're good on Twitter. Give me 1 second to share this. All right, peeps. Can my YouTube people hear me okay? Just want to make sure everybody can hear me okay, and then we'll go ahead and get started. YouTube. I know that YouTube is taking forever to allow people to load in to the live stream, so just give it a second and we'll go ahead and get started, people. Thank you for your patience. Hope everybody's having a good morning. I'm having a pretty good morning. It's a little early, but well, not early. Technically, I'm late, but I usually get up really early. Hear me okay? Okay, good stuff. Alright. Okay, good stuff. So it looks like we're all good to go. I do want to thank everybody for tuning in. If you have not yet, make sure that you go and register for justinform.com and join us in this evolution of social media that we have started. And I encourage you to do so, mostly because, well, you know, after Seth Rich videos, no matter how factual they may be, you usually tend to get booted shortly after. Luckily, I have been fortunate. I've been lucky to not have that happen to me, but you never know. So after conversing with some of my colleagues and doing some research myself and listening to the interview I've listened to it about 2 to 3 times. There have been, you know, some questions, not illegitimate ones, as to whether or not we can trust the new witness in the Seth Rich investigation. And I don't think that that's, I think that we should be asking that, right? No matter what, because we always want to approach anything like this with a level of scrutiny because of all the psyops we've seen in the past, right? There has been a history of the government planting people, planting obstacles that will play as allies to your movement, to your cause. We've seen this in activism too. If you've ever heard of, oh my goodness, I can't remember the name of them. Okay, so I don't remember the name of them. I think it's Tiger Swan. That's what it is. Tiger Swan is a a fake activism group where they use activists, plant them in like real activism groups, and then have them sabotage. Usually these people are like prior convicted felons, or at least they would have been convicted if they didn't cop a plea deal, things like that. So like using psyops and using plants like this could be very well be a plant. It's not really uncommon. So of course we want to scrutinize. We don't want to say, oh no, we know for a fact it's fake, but we don't want to put all of our eggs in one basket when it comes to any one witness. So do I personally believe that we can trust the witness? I don't know yet. I do trust things that he says. If you don't know, the witness name is Luke. Luke was apparently, it's been reported that he was originally discovered by Matt Couch, who is in kind of like an independent journalist who took it upon himself to focus on the Seth Rich investigation. I like a lot of what Matt has done with the Seth Rich investigation. I like his persistence. Not necessarily all the right-wing stuff, but I do in fact like his investigation. He's done a very thorough job, and I think that he's really displayed a lot of integrity by pursuing it, and dexterity by, the dude's been putting in a lot of work and getting a lot of pushback over it. So I do want to applaud him for his, the amount of dedication that he's shown with regard to the Seth Rich investigation. But I digress. I know this witness was brought to Berkman's attention about, I want to say almost 5 months ago. But they had to go through a process to ensure that he was in fact a legitimate witness. Now, I don't want to take you through all hour and 40 minutes of the press conference, but I will tell you some interesting details that I felt like stood out. So first, in case you did not know, Jack Berkman is a former lobbyist, former attorney, but originally was put on this investigation by the family, and then the family cut ties with him around the times that Brad Bowman got on with the family. I know you all know about Brad Bowman. If you know, if you do not know who Brad is actually the crisis management PR guy for the Democratic Party. That's what he's known for. And that's whenever we stopped seeing the public appearances by the family, we stopped hearing everything from their own words. We started seeing everything in a letter instead. Yeah, so Jack did used to work closely with the family until Brad Bowman got there. Then he hired someone named Doherty, who eventually tried to kill him, actually. He was leading the investigation on behalf of Jack Berkman, and then he tried to kill him, a guy named Doherty. So fast forward, this witness comes out. Now, the witness was found before the assassination attempt. That's what makes this a little bit more interesting. I didn't know that until yesterday. I thought this witness was fairly recent, but the witness was found months ago. It's just that they had to vet the witness, which takes time, and it takes you have to go through a process, And so this Doherty guy was the lead guy on Berkman's investigation. So that means he was there when the witness was found. And then this same guy made an assassination attempt on Jack Berkman's life. And then obviously about a month and a half later, Berkman comes forward with this witness. And I'll go in a little bit in a second into what the witness talked about. But I want to kind of set the scene for you, because the scene and the people involved are kind of important as well. So, in that press conference, I personally expected only maybe one or two progressives, independent voices there, and then a few right-leaning independent voices to cover it. What I was not expecting, because let's be honest, they've ridiculed, the Seth Rich investigation. But what I was not expecting was the Daily Beast to show up. I was not expecting the Washington Post to show up. I was not expecting New York Times to show up. I was not expecting Yahoo News to show up. I believe even CNN showed up. So they call this investigation a waste of time pretty regularly. They insult anyone who discusses this investigation. And whenever there are major breakthroughs in the investigation, one way or the other, they immediately come out and insult anyone they gaslight anyone who even tries to talk about this or discuss this investigation in a reasonable manner. If we say something to the effect of, well, why do we still not have an autopsy on Seth Rich? They're like, oh my God, the family said leave it alone. Why don't you listen to the family? It's like, but the family also raised a bunch of money to investigate the matter. So that's kind of contrary to what their actions display. And they're like, you're a right-wing conspiracy theorist. It's like, nah, these are pretty much just basic questions to a murder that I would not have been as suspicious about before. But now I'm really suspicious because you keep doing everything in your power to not talk about it, right? So I was like, oh, this is interesting. I didn't know that all these publications would be here. So that kind of made me a little bit more curious. Now, about what Jack said. Luke, which is a pseudonym because they don't want to release his real name. Luke said that he actually knows the killers. There was one that he doesn't know that well. There were supposedly three in total. Two he knows for a fact. One works for ATF. One works for the DEA. That's the Drug Enforcement Administration. ATF is alcohol, and I think alcohol, tobacco. I don't know what that stands for. But moral of the story is, he's claiming that these guys are Rod Rosenstein's deputy attorney generals. He's claiming that these are his right-hand guys, which is a bold claim. And I was like, you got all this information that you're about to give us in a conversation. And then he explained that he is also in the intel community. He is what would be considered an unofficial asset. At least that's what it sounds like, because he couldn't go into that many details. But for his protection, obviously. But it does indeed sound like he is an unofficial asset. And given the amount of whistleblowers like Cody Snodgrass who have come out recently, I would not be surprised if that were true. So he tells us that these two killers are connected to Rod Rosenstein. And firearms. Thank you, Natural Progressive. Alcohol, tobacco, and firearms. That's what ATF stands for. So he goes on to say that this was not figured out in one conversation. The details of their involvement were outlined in several conversations. And the reason why he was able to figure this out was because, they were being very braggadocious about the murder. They were being braggadocious about getting away with it. And he also further talks about the fact that actually it was indeed not a botched robbery, which is interesting. And I'll explain a little bit more about that in a second. But essentially, the fact that there was something stolen cancels out what they were saying about it being botched. Right? That should have been for the cops, a murder where nothing was taken, but they're calling it a botched robbery. That should perk up their senses a little bit, you would think. But it didn't. Or it did, and that's why they totally avoided it. But whatever. So, but there was something, the story that Luke told us runs parallel to the information that we've been given. Some people think it runs contrast. They think it kind of cuts the story off at the head, but I believe it's actually quite the contrary, and I'll explain that too. But he said that there was a USB flash drive stolen, and he said that it was always on Seth Rich, and that these people had been tailing Seth Rich for quite some time, but he always had the flash drive on him. So the only way to get it off of his person, quickly, would be a physical altercation, which explains why that happened. Now, that's a lot of information, right? It's like, I don't know if you can buy the fact that these people would be braggadocious about something like that. But the unfortunate truth of the matter is, when it comes to these type of guys, this is what they do. Espionage is what they love doing, because they legitimately think that they're doing it on behalf of their nation, one, or they get paid so much to do this job, they don't care. They've taught themselves to be totally apathetic. They've taught themselves it's a dog-eat-dog world, and I just happen to get a bigger check than you did. That is how these people look at actions like this. So them being braggadocious about killing Seth Rich and taking that thumb drive is not really that surprising. So going forward, they ask him, well, how do we know we can trust you? Why haven't you talked to anybody? And that turned out to not be true. He was being hesitant to discuss it out loud, but he did talk to somebody, and after they pushed him, he was finally kind of forced to admit it. And of course, you know who was pushing him. Daily Beast, as usual, right? That's the Chelsea Clinton-backed publication. He says that he had to take a polygraph test, which he did indeed pass. He testified and offered all the evidence in front of the House Intelligence Committee, which Jack Berkman did substantiate. He corroborated that story. If this were untrue, if everything that this guy was saying was untrue to the point where, like, you just got to throw him out as a witness. For one, I don't think Jack Berkman would actually throw his career away over a false witness. And, he's been investigating this long enough, and he's also been in Washington long enough to know how the game is played. So I think that's what took him so long to vet this particular witness. He's been a lobbyist. He's been an attorney. He's been in Washington. He knows how the game goes. So I'll have to just trust him on that one. But furthermore, any of those publications, the editor-in-chiefs, the guys at the top or the women at the top, especially for the Daily Beast, they could actually go to the House Intel Committee, maybe not necessarily ask what his name was, but they could ask, well, hey, did you get evidence from this guy? They can go to somebody on the House Intel Committee. Did you get evidence from this guy? Did this guy testify in front of you guys? And if they said no, who would probably be the first one to report on it? Daily Beast. They laughed about it. They tried to pretend like it was nothing. But they didn't say that it was a fake. They didn't say that he couldn't be trusted. They didn't say that they had disproven everything or anything that he said. They just said that, he didn't give all the information that they thought he was going to give, even though he came out very early on and said, well, a lot of this stuff has to roll out over the coming weeks because we have to make sure that, you stay protected, which makes sense. But if you noticed, did you all read anything about that particular witness in Washington Post, in the New York Times, on CNN, on MSNBC, hell, even on Fox News? Sean Hannity didn't discuss it, not to my knowledge. Alex Jones, I think somebody on the Alex Jones channel discussed it very briefly, but I don't think Alex Jones himself discussed it. And so you kind of have to. That's suspicious, and people wouldn't naturally think of that as suspicious. But being a part of media myself, I know when there's a big story, when it's covered by everybody in the exact same way, you should be worried. When it's covered by nobody in the exact same way, even though you personally know this is a huge story. Think Standing Rock. Think the girl who lost her eye and the other woman the other young lady who lost her arm and that was barely covered by anybody. That was a massive story. That would have probably put Obama under. And it was not covered by the mainstream. So think about it from that perspective. Think about the Seth Rich investigation from the perspective of before they absolutely refused to cover the developments. And then because big revelations started breaking, everyone covered it, but it was in the mainstream covered it. They all covered it, but it was in a very subjective, propagandist type of way. So now we're put at that same crossroad where we have a witness that is claiming to be a huge witness, that is claiming to have taken a polygraph test, that is claiming to have given his evidence in part of his testimony to the House Intelligence Committee. And the next day, instead of all these publications were at this witness's press conference, which is a big deal. Because they've been telling us that the Seth Rich investigation was a nothing burger this entire time. So if that's the case, why are you here? Why are you sitting in the same building as Jason Goodman from Crowdsource the Truth if you're claiming that he personally, is a conspiracy theorist? Why are you taking this case as seriously as he would, or as I take it seriously? Because he was a progressive, and I do believe that he was connected to WikiLeaks. So it's when things like this come out and they can be easily disproven by those in power, especially by those in power and who have the media behind them. Daily Beast, Washington Post, New York Times, etc., 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 Yahoo News, they could all contact a congressperson on the House Intel Committee and say, did this guy testify? That's all you got to say, yes or no. And if it was a no, they would be the first ones to come out with story after story after story after story after story to discredit this guy. But that's not what happened. Instead, 12 Russians were indicted by Mueller and announced by Rosenstein right after Rosenstein was just implicated in the Seth Rich investigation. Now, I will say that it's also right around the time or right before Trump met with Putin at that conference. Yeah, that's really weird, right? But also, this witness's story, believe it or not, because he sounded kind of naive. Like, he was very hyper focused on the story, right? He was kind of naive about what was going on surrounding it. But he was talking about the flash drive, right? Now, what do we know from the story that was released by Disobedient Media, actually, over a year and a half ago now? It was found that Guccifer 2.0's file transfer, for the files that were transferred, the forensic evidence says that they were transferred in the United States, likely on the West Coast. It also shows that the documents in that particular drop by Guccifer 2.0 were tampered with. But it gets better because Luke, the witness, says that they were actually talking about tampering with the emails and releasing them to the public. And he said essentially when he started seeing some of this stuff in the news being discussed and then like hearing how their stories matched up, he realized like, oh wow, y'all are trying to influence the outcome of an election one way or the other. Like you're essentially trying to infringe on democracy, and that's not what we're here for. And therefore, that's why I guess he felt compelled to speak up. But the forensic evidence did find that, like, they discovered that Guccifer 2.0 did actually tamper with the investigation. Now, what else do we know? We know that it was claimed to be a botched robbery, but apparently it was not a botched robbery. Seth Rich was killed on or about July 10th. Those leaks from Guccifer were dropped later on that month. Interesting. Those leaks from Guccifer were dropped after the Seth Rich murder. The WikiLeaks drops were totally untampered with. Mind you, Kim.com said pretty clearly over and over and over again, I will testify. I will come to America and testify and give a written testimony if you all simply include Seth Rich's murder as part of the Russiagate investigation so that we can get some indictments. Now, here's what's scary about that, people. If Rod Rosenstein is partially, even Deputy Attorney General, you have a lot of power. And if he's even partially involved in this murder, even if optically it could be drawn back to him, do you think Rod Rosenstein would ever take Kim.com? Do you think that he would ever take in Julian Assange? It would actually make all the sense in the world that somebody in the DOJ could potentially be involved in this. Because otherwise, why would you do everything in your power to investigate every single aspect of a Russiagate investigation except for all the people who are like, we can testify right now, we're witnesses. We can literally testify and close this case right now. But it doesn't happen. Now, here's where, if I was skeptical, because I was skeptical, probably more skeptical than a lot of people, when it came to this new witness, I was very skeptical. But here's where my skepticism kind of started wearing a little thin. Because when I started reading that indictment, and a day or two after, this guy talks about the USB flash drive. A day or two after, this witness starts saying that these files were tampered with. A day or two after Rosenstein was implicated. A day or two after he pretty much said everything but, yeah, like where he's saying that the guys that tampered with this were in the United States. Like, do you understand what I'm saying? And then all of a sudden, 12 Russian officers were indicted. And these officers and the organizations they were part of, they are what made up Guccifer 2.0. It was in Russia. Totally undermining the narrative and the testimony of that specific witness. But if Kim.com just in May of 2018 said, I will give my written testimony to show you all that Seth Rich was indeed the WikiLeaks provider, you totally ignore that claim. I mean, he did it publicly. He tried to get in touch with Mueller over and over and over and over and over again. Why not? Why not invest? Why not allow Kim.com to testify? I feel like that's a simple price to pay. Oh, oh snaps! We just found out who did actually murder him. Wow, our bad democracy. We thought it was the Russians, but turns out it was just here. It was just the United States doing what it does. That's potentially what could be found out. But you're tiptoeing around all the evidence that's in front of you. You're tiptoeing around all the voluntary testimonies that could be given. And then right after this guy says These DEA agents potentially are DEA ATF agents potentially murdered Seth Rich. They did indeed tamper with the documents they released. There was a USB flash drive, so it was not a botched robbery. It was actually a successful robbery. They even went through the details about how they killed him. And then 2 days later, 12 Russian officers get indicted, being claimed to be Guccifer 2.0, who we do know tampered with the documents that we do know was based out of the United States. So, with that being said, do I think the witness is trustworthy? I'm leaning personally towards yes. I'll let you be the judge of that, but personally, I am leaning towards yes. It's just there's no such thing as coincidences when it comes to politics. That release, that press release of those indictments was too well timed. So, thank you all so much for tuning in to this particular segment of Mi Casa Su Casa. Hope to see you tonight for our 2-hour show on AmericanFreedomRadio.com. And, well, I guess more than anything else, always remember, find your balance. Peace.